Hello. This is Mr. Math, your chess instructor. Welcome back to Office Hours, the series where we cover more casual topics instead of your regular lectures. In this video, we'll be analyzing the gameplay of video game streamer Tyler1. Tyler1 was originally known for streaming the popular video game League of Legends, but in recent months, he gained attention for his exploits in chess. As of time of recording, his puzzles rating is a ridiculous 3,500. However, although his chess rating has seen quick-looking growth, his rapid and blitz ratings are 1400 and 1000 respectively, with his only bullet rating being the one that broke 1500. Now, Tyler 1 doesn't actually have any recent games of blitz or rapid. These most recent games I could find were from December in 2023. However, in these games, we can still clearly see some of his strengths and weaknesses. In this game we'll go over, Tyler 1 was playing white, and immediately from the opening, we can see one of his quirks. His opening choice is quite strange and somewhat similar to a hippo opening, but not quite. Now, a hippo, of course, is when you go e3, d3, you put the knights on e2 and d2, and then you fiend shadow both your bishops. Now, normally he also opts to play bishop d2, but here he chose to castle. He also usually chooses to push the c or the f pawn. But perhaps he sensed the danger the center was about to be in this game, with black's pawns both on d5 and e5. Now, to be clear, the setup is quite bad. It concedes central control of the opponent's central squares, only playing defensively for your side's central squares. And it also develops quite inefficiently, since, unlike even the hippo, for example, the knights have to move twice instead of once to be developed. Furthermore, the side pawn pushes that he usually goes for aren't even supported that well. In the hippo, by contrast, for example, because of the fiend shadow pawn and because the knight doesn't move twice, these side pawn pushes are a lot more viable. Still, it's better to have a bad plan in the opening than have no plan in the opening. And Tyler 1's consistency in doing this is a positive thing in and of itself. And at this elo, it's also not punished very well. As we see here, black plays e4, which is a waste of time. He really should have been developing the bishop, developing the queen, developing the rooks. He plays e4, it's a waste of time moving the same piece twice. And then his opponent also wastes two moves with his knight in order to reroute it to f5. But this runs afoul of two middle game concepts. First of all, between the two players, since white has developed less, it's really important that black be the one to go on the attack, and the attacking player typically doesn't want to trade pieces. Second of all, in terms of space, because of the structure in the center, because white's setup was so passive, white has a lot less space, black has a lot more space. Trades tend to benefit the player with less space because they allow the pieces to be freed up to maneuver more freely, whereas the player who has more space already had enough space to maneuver anyway. So this trade is very good for Tyler 1. Now, Tyler 1's next move shows a lot about how he thinks. Queen e1. This move has one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to set up a battery attack on the a5 pawn. However, this is terrible positionally. The queen accomplishes nothing on e1. Instead, this move actively blocks in white's rook and removes white's support of the light squared bishop, which matters more since black's pawns are already on dark squares anyway. Far better would have been knight c5, looking to free some space in the cramped position, maybe baiting out a trade from black, which, as we've mentioned, would be good for white. However, because Tyler 1 played queen e1, black simply defends the a5 pawn with a battery of his own, c6. And this one single move provides us into a lot of insights into Tyler 1. In the middle game, he lacks positional understanding and instead plays for singular impulsive strikes. We see that again with his next move, c4, targeting black's center. Black can just ignore this. After bishop c7, for example, c4 reveals itself to have accomplished very little. There's no real threat on d5, it's defended very well. And furthermore, black's going to have a lot of good kingside pressure with these two bishops, whereas white's bishops are kind of stuck. However, black instead helps Tyler1, plays bishop g4. This is another bad trade. It lets Tyler1 free up even more space. But before taking the trade, Tyler1 responds with another positional mistake of his own, c5. Tyler1 is about to trade off the light squared bishop, which means his pawns need to pick up the slack. However, instead of playing queen e2, or just playing rook c1, in order to support this light squared pawn, Tyler1 plays c5. And this is terrible. After takes from both sides, we now see the positional results of Tyler1's play. Not a single one of his pieces is capable of making useful movements or freeing itself. As a result, in this position, white now has no good way of defending this h-pawn, and this is the result of playing in the moment rather than with understanding of middle game principles. That said, this is also intermediate elo, and as a result, Tyler1's mistakes end up not mattering too much because his opponent gives him all the tools that he needs to free himself. After pawn to h3, instead of playing knight h2 and winning the trapped rook, since of course the knight would be protected by the bishop and couldn't be captured, Tyler1's opponent rather decides to retreat. And after Tyler1 plays f4, which is another mistake, f3 is better, as f4 puts the pawn again on a dark square when the bishop is already locked in. Black instead opts to help Tyler free himself anyway and pretend as if Tyler played f3 with en passant. And then plays queen g5, voluntarily removing the necessary defender of the pawn on a5. And as a result, this allows Tyler1 to free his bishop and trade it for black's excellent bishop while also winning a pawn. Now, with the position more open, Tyler1's excellent short-term analytical skills show. He manages to win another pawn, deflects black's weak attempt at a kingside attack right back at him, centralizes his knight, and gets a good bit of breathing room on the queen side while defending the pawn. His opponent sort of just collapses from here, and Tyler1 takes maximum advantage. Black fails to notice that the b4 pawn is defended by the queen, and takes. And then Tyler1 uncorks a great combination of intermezzo and fork, instead of immediately taking black's knight, by forking the knight in the pawn, and using the concept of a bigger threat. The queen matters more than the knight here. After black moves, rook captures g7 check on it. Now knight takes g7 technically would have been more accurate, but this is quite geometrically cool too. Rook takes g7, king h8. And in the resulting sort of tactical scuffle, Tyler1 maneuvers just fine and comes out of it ahead overall, and then simplifies trading queens into a mating net. Black gives some checks, but to no avail. He eventually runs out, and Tyler1 shows his idea after black does. Knight takes f7, and a nice semi-smothered mate. The king can't move up because of the pawn, and it's also blocked in by the bishop, so this is checkmate. So as we can see, Tyler1 has great tactical potential in the moment, but has bad longer-term strategical planning, and a weak understanding of positional dynamics. It's perhaps no surprise then that the mode that he currently plays the most is Bullet, which is a format where each player has only a single minute on the clock. Naturally, with so little time to think, mistakes are far more common, which allows for tactics to have more of a role in the outcome of the game. We see this on full display in the next game. Once again, Tyler1 plays white, and he leads off with his signature opening, moving the knights twice, and the bishops onto d2 and e2. This time, though, his opponent wastes no time launching an attack against the slow setup. f4, sacrificing a pawn, and then he manages to capitalize on a slight error by Tyler1. Bishop d2 was correct, but after bishop e3, his opponent trades pieces to prevent Tyler1 from castling. Black then activates his bishop, cuts off white's king's ability to castle completely, and also gives check, which also prevents him from castling, and then activates his queen. At this point, the issue with Tyler1's slow opening moves, I hope, are clear. However, in the low time environment of Bullet, these advantages built into the opening matter less, and middle game tactics, Tyler1's strong suit, matter more. Black now attempts to open up the center, but after he does, Tyler1 generates counterplay by activating his own pieces, regardless of his position's safety. He brings out the queen, and then his rook. In doing so, he also manages to win a couple pawns on Black's 7th rank. With Black at the time, however, in this position they could have found Queen G6 check, and no matter what White does, they're not in a good spot. King C1, for example, runs into Bishop E3, and there's a sort of deadly lasering here of White's king. Bishop D3 runs into the problem of Knight takes D3, Rook takes D3, and the Rook gets pinned, and then Black's Rook gets an opportunity to come in for a mating threat on the next turn after the king goes back, or to simply add pressure to the pin. However, Black makes a tiny, tiny positional mistake, and by tiny, I mean massive, because Rook F2 looks very nice, pins this bishop, and Queen G6 is a big threat next turn as well. But of course, the big problem, this Rook is no longer defended. And so a single move, single error, and Tyler1 immediately capitalizes. Queen takes A8 check. Black tries to block, but to no avail. Queen takes D8, Queen takes D8, Rook takes D8, and it's a back rank mate in a victory for Tyler1. And just like that, the game from one middle game tactic scuffle goes from completely losing to completely won. Playing such a low time control gives another advantage to Tyler1. It fundamentally changes the game to be less like a turn-based one and more like a real-time one. And in these environments, sometimes speed matters more than the game's fundamentals. We see this on full display in our final game. Tyler1 played black in this game instead of white, and both sides played extremely dubious openings. Tyler1 again, moving the knights out, this time also pushing up the side pawns for some reason, and his opponent replied by also making some really weird pawn movements, moving the knight back and forth, just completely wasting time, and developing the bishops instead of to fianchettos, which would have been at least somewhat normal, onto the side squares. This time, Tyler1 got to be the first aggressor. He offered a exchange of bishops, which White accepted, and then decided to go for a sacrifice. Sacrificed his bishop with bishop takes h4, g takes h4 to open up White's king. And this is not a terrible idea. After knight takes h4, White's king would in fact be in a lot of trouble. But he sees that queen g4, king h2, knight takes h4 would be even stronger. However, what he misses is that White can simply trade the queens. And after this trade of queens, with so many trades this early, the game starts to shift into an endgame, which is more strategy focused and less tactics focused. And as the dust settles, we see that what happens in the end is that White goes up a piece, he has a bishop and Black doesn't, in exchange for 2 pawns. Here, the name of the game is Piece Activity and Creation of Passed Pawns. His opponent attempts the former with b4, a takes b4, bishop takes b4, trying to free this bishop. But he actually misses the opportunity, interestingly, to go a5, and then c takes b4. This would have allowed White to use this a5 pawn to create a passed pawn, which can eventually turn into a queen. And while White's attempt to play bishop takes b4 and free the bishop is fine, what we see is that when White now attempts to make the passed pawn anyway with a5 and a6, it just gets traded off by Black's pawn. However, again, Tyler1's greater lack of positional understanding shows, and he wastes time by moving his knight multiple times, and then even worse, ends up trapping his own rook. And this allows White to play knight d2, and he doesn't even attempt to play knight h3 to free rook h3 to free himself. He just lets it go down. At this point, the win for White is kind of a formality. Pieces are exchanged as White keeps picking up pawns, and eventually we have white playing rook takes d6 to simplify the position, and we have king and pawns against king. Those of you who've watched my king and pawn endgame videos will know that when the king is sufficiently ahead of the pawn, this is in fact a win for the side with pawns, especially so, of course, when there are multiple pawns. And so Tyler1 really can't do much here to stop white from making their queen. However, white at this point only had 2 seconds left on the clock. And so he only had a few moves to try and take advantage of this extra queen he had until the game was declared a draw. Because white ran out of time, and since Tyler1 had only a king left, and therefore, given even infinite time, he couldn't have checkmated white, the game is declared automatically a draw by insufficient material. So, all in all, Tyler1's playstyle is just about what you would expect from him. It's very much in the moment and very much focused on tactics, making it great in lower time controls. On the positive side, his adherence to a single opening, as well as his willingness to spend extremely high amounts of time practicing tactics, give him reasonable overall chess skills. However, this style comes with clear and predictable weaknesses. Without proper understanding of the principles behind why the moves he makes are good, and only brute force memorization of tactics, he often makes positional mistakes during games and can only really improve by playing a ridiculous number of ridiculous number of games rather to train his brain. Overall, I think he would benefit greatly from learning basic opening and middle game concepts that would prevent him from having to utilize the tactics that he does in the first place. And this would unlock his ability to use tactics more for a more aggressive style than trying to make comebacks. If you want to learn more about some of the chess concepts I discussed in this video, or want to see my analysis of other players, feel free to look around this channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next class.